Before you hear what happened to me, understand this. I'm not telling a story, I'm documenting a failure. If you're listening to this because you like being scared, turn it off now. What happened didn't end when we left the ice. It followed me back. And if this recording cuts out, it means I waited too long to say something. I shouldn't be alive. That's not survivor's guilt talking. That's math, logistics, probability, the kind of numbers you learn to respect when you work in places where mistakes don't get second chances. I've replayed the sequence 1,000 times, trying to find the point where things became irreversible. I still can't pinpoint it. I only know that whatever we disturbed out there didn't need us to stay. It needed us to leave. I'm recording this because sleep isn't an option anymore. Because when I close my eyes, I'm back in that white silence, staring at something that was never meant to be seen by anyone who breathes air. Because the sound I hear now, late at night when the house is still, is the same sound that woke me on the ice. If you're involved in polar research, or you're thinking about signing on to an expedition, listen carefully. There are places where the ground remembers things, places where the ice isn't just ice, and places where the mountains don't rise naturally, they press upward. I was part of a joint research team sent to Antarctica under a grant tied to subglacial mapping. On paper, it was routine. Radar surveys, core sampling, data collection for climate modeling. Nothing classified, nothing dramatic. We weren't looking for life or secrets or ancient anything. We were looking for patterns. That's what I keep telling myself. The last clear memory I have before everything went wrong is standing outside the temporary barracks at 0300 hours, watching the horizon glow faintly blue under a sun that never quite set. The air smelled metallic, like frozen blood. The wind was calm, unnaturally so, and the mountains in the distance, jagged, black, wrong, looked closer than they had the day before. No one else noticed. That should have been my warning. Life on the ice becomes routine faster than you'd expect. You stop thinking about the cold as something hostile and start treating it like background radiation, dangerous, but manageable if you respect the rules. Wake up, check instruments, eat food that tastes like nothing, log data, sleep in short, shallow shifts. My job was to maintain the ground-penetrating radar arrays and process preliminary imaging. I trusted numbers more than people, and Antarctica rewarded that mindset. The machines didn't lie. The ice didn't improvise. At first, our camp sat on a flat expanse roughly 40 miles from the nearest established station. The mountains to the south were mapped but largely ignored. Too jagged, too unstable, not worth the fuel cost to explore. We weren't supposed to be anywhere near them. Then the anomalies started showing up in the scans. At shallow depth, everything looked normal. Stratified ice layers, compacted snow, expected density shifts. But below that, far below what we planned to analyze, the returns changed. Smooth curves gave way to hard angles. Repetition, symmetry. I recalibrated the equipment 3 times. Blamed interference, solar noise, instrument drift. The pattern stayed. They weren't caves or rock shelves. They looked manufactured, but not in a way I could explain. Too precise for geology, too vast for anything human. I brought it up during the evening briefing. The room smelled like instant coffee and damp insulation. A few people glanced at the screen, nodded, moved on. Antarctica messes with your head, they said. Parallax, compression artifacts. I wanted to believe them. That night I heard something outside my tent. Not footsteps, not wind. A low rhythmic sound like pressure equalizing in a sealed container. It stopped when I held my breath. The next morning, I noticed the mountains were closer. Not visually, measurably. GPS confirmed it. The distance between our camp and the southern range had decreased by almost a kilometer. No one had an explanation. We adjusted our maps. Once the decision was made to move camp closer to the anomaly, equipment failures became frequent. Batteries drained overnight. Compasses spun uselessly. The silence grew heavier, pressing against the eardrums until even conversation felt intrusive. Sleep became fragmented. I'd wake up convinced someone was standing just outside the tent, waiting for me to unzip the flap. Each time I checked, there was nothing. No footprints, no disturbed snow. But the radar images changed. The structures beneath the ice appeared to shift between scans. Not drastically, just enough to suggest adjustment, alignment, as if whatever was down there responded to observation. I stopped sharing that thought. We reached the foothills on the 6th day. The mountains weren't mountains in the way I understood them. Their slopes were too steep, their angles too clean. Rock jutted upward through ice like exposed bone. The air felt different there, thinner, sharper, carrying a faint vibration I could feel in my teeth. That was when I heard voices. Not clearly, not words, just the cadence of speech echoing through the ravines, distorted by distance. When I mentioned it to the others, a few admitted they'd heard it too, but only when alone. No one suggested turning back. That night, while processing a fresh scan, I realized the deepest structures formed a spiral. Not descending, ascending, toward the mountains, toward us. This is where I need to say this once, and only once. If you're still listening, subscribe to Nightmare Crypt. Not for entertainment, because people need a place where warnings don't get buried under explanations. We found the opening by accident. A collapse in the ice revealed a vertical shaft descending into darkness. The edges were smooth, glazed, as if melted and refrozen. The temperature inside was higher than outside, impossibly so. I volunteered to go down. That was the moment I lost control, even if I didn't realize it yet. The descent was silent except for my breathing and the soft whine of the winch. My headlamp illuminated walls that weren't ice. They were something else, translucent, layered, faintly veined. They pulsed when I touched them. Halfway down, the radio crackled. Not static, breathing. Slow, deliberate, familiar. My own. I tried to respond. The words came out wrong, stretched, echoed back to me a fraction of a second later. That's when the panic hit. Sharp, absolute. My heart slammed against my ribs as the shaft seemed to narrow, the walls pressing inward. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, the light revealed something carved into the wall. Not symbols. Measurements. Human measurements. I realized then that whatever built this place knew our dimensions before we ever arrived. The winch stopped. Above me, the rope went slack. Below me, something moved. I don't know exactly when the mountain stopped feeling like a place and started feeling like a presence. Up until then, I still believed I could leave. The next morning, if it was morning, the sky was the color of dirty aluminum. No sunrise, just a dim, flat light that made everything look drained and thin. My watch said 6:12 a.m., but it hadn't ticked forward once all night. I tapped the glass. Nothing. The second hand was frozen, like it had died mid-breath. The air inside the tent smelled wrong. Not mold. Something mineral, like wet stone and old pennies. I crawled out slowly, my joints stiff, my mouth dry enough to hurt. The wind had stopped completely. Not calm. Stopped. The prayer flags I'd tied between two ice screws were hanging straight down, unmoving, like strips of skin. Snow particles hung in the air, not falling, just suspended. I waved my hand through them and they drifted aside reluctantly, as if pushed through water. That should have been the moment I turned back. Instead, I told myself altitude sickness messes with perception. I'd read that. I'd trained for that. I was alone, exhausted, dehydrated. The brain lies under stress. The mountain doesn't. I packed quickly. I didn't eat. I couldn't stomach the smell of my own food. As I cinched my pack, I noticed something that made my fingers fumble the buckles. There were footprints outside my tent. They were mine, but wrong. Same boot tread, same spacing. But they approached from the whiteout beyond my camp and stopped inches from the tent flap. They didn't circle. They didn't leave. They just arrived. I stood there for a long time staring at them, waiting for the panic to hit. It didn't. What I felt was worse. A dull, heavy certainty, like remembering something I didn't want to remember. I erased the prints with my boots, over and over until the snow was smooth again. Then I started climbing. The route I'd planned should have taken me across a shallow saddle and up a broken ridgeline. I'd studied satellite images for months. I could see it clearly in my head. But the saddle never came. The terrain kept repeating. Same rock formation, 3 black teeth jutting from the ice, same narrow crevasse veering left. Same wind-carved drift, shaped like a crouched animal. I marked the ice with red tape the first time I passed it. The second time, the tape was already there. By the third time, there were 3 strips, neatly spaced, all faded the same way. I stopped moving. I listened. No wind, no shifting ice, no distant avalanches, nothing. Then very faintly, I heard breathing, not close, not far, all around me. It wasn't loud, it wasn't threatening, it was steady and patient, like someone asleep in a dark room. I pulled my hood tighter, even though I wasn't cold anymore. My body felt strangely warm, almost feverish. Sweat prickled under my layers despite the temperature. "Get a grip," I said out loud. My voice sounded wrong, flattened, like it had nowhere to go. That's when I realized the sound of my voice didn't echo. Mountains echo, even small noises bounce and scatter. Mine just died. I turned in a slow circle. The horizon felt closer than it should have been, like the world had subtly folded inward while I wasn't looking. I picked a direction at random and walked. I don't know how long passed. Time had lost its edges. My watch still read 6:12. The light never changed. My legs moved, but it felt like walking on a treadmill, effort without progress. Then I saw the tent. My tent, perfectly pitched, lines tight, gear stacked exactly the way I'd left it. Smoke curled gently from the stove vent. I stood there, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I hadn't lit the stove. I hadn't been back. I approached slowly, every nerve screaming not to. As I got closer, I noticed small details that didn't belong. My pack leaned against the ice wall, but the zipper was open. I always closed it. My ice axe was planted blade first in the snow, something I never did because it dulled the edge. And there were footprints again, only this time they led away from the tent. I didn't go inside. I sat down in the snow, my knees weak, and tried to think. Hypoxia, hallucinations, dissociation. There were explanations, there had to be. Then I heard myself inside the tent, coughing. A dry, familiar cough I'd had for weeks, since a bad cold back home. "Hello?" my voice said softly from inside the nylon walls. I stood up so fast I nearly fell. "Don't," the voice said. Same tone I use when I talk myself through fear. Calm, controlled. "It's not time." I backed away until my calves hit ice. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. "Who are you?" I asked. There was a pause. Then, "I'm you who stayed." That broke something in me. I ran. I don't remember deciding where to go. I just moved. I slid, stumbled, clawed my way upward until my lungs burned and my vision tunneled. The breathing came with me. Closer now. I started to hear footsteps that matched mine half a second too late. When I stopped, they stopped. When I turned, there was nothing behind me, but I could feel the pressure of something standing just outside my field of vision, waiting for me to look directly at it. I didn't. I reached a rock outcrop that wasn't on any map, a sheer wall of dark stone thrusting up from the ice like a buried building. Its surface was unnaturally smooth, almost polished, except for a wide opening at its base. A cave. No, a door. The opening wasn't jagged or eroded. It was symmetrical, tall, wide. The edges curved inward slightly, like something had been carved out, not by tools, but by removal, like matter had been erased. The breathing stopped there. Silence rushed in so suddenly my ears rang. I knew with absolute certainty that if I went inside, something irreversible would happen. I went inside. The temperature changed immediately. Not warmer or colder, neutral, dead. The air smelled ancient but not dusty. Clean, sterile. The walls absorbed my headlamp beam instead of reflecting it. The light felt swallowed, leaving only a dull halo around me. The floor sloped gently downward. As I walked, I began to hear sounds again, but not from behind or ahead. From inside my own skull, memories I hadn't thought about in years surfaced uninvited. Conversations, regrets, things I'd said wrong, people I'd left without explanation. The mountain peeled through me slowly, deliberately, like fingers flipping through pages. My head started to ache. Deep, pressure behind the eyes. Then I saw them, shapes embedded in the walls. Not carvings, not fossils. People, frozen mid-motion, half merged with the stone. Faces stretched in expressions that weren't quite pain and weren't quite peace. Mouths open as if interrupted. Their clothing was wrong for the place. Old parkas, modern climbing gear, denim, military fabric. Logos. I recognized a watch on one wrist. My watch. I staggered back, retching, but nothing came up. That's when I understood. The mountain wasn't killing people. It was keeping them, replaying them, learning them. I felt something shift behind me. I didn't turn. I can leave, I said to no one. I don't belong here. The silence pressed closer. Then very gently, a hand settled on my shoulder. My own hand. I already tried, my voice said from behind me. It doesn't let go once it knows you. My knees buckled. The walls began to hum, not a sound, but a vibration that shook my bones. The faces in the stone seemed to watch, not with eyes, but with attention. I realized then that the mountain wasn't a place you climbed. It was a process, and I was already too deep. I don't remember how I got out. I remember clawing at ice until my fingers split. I remember the sky finally darkening, not into night, but into something heavier. I woke up days later in a rescue tent miles from where I'd started. Hypothermic, dehydrated, found wandering in circles according to the report. They asked me where my gear was. I told them the truth. They didn't write it down. They said I'd been alone the entire time. They're wrong. I still hear the breathing sometimes, late at night when everything is quiet enough. I still wake up convinced there's someone standing just behind me, waiting for me to remember the rest. I'm telling you this because I don't think it's done with me. And if you're listening to this because you're planning a climb, if that mountain calls to you in a way you can't explain, don't answer. It already knows your voice.